The city moved as it always did, steel and glass humming beneath a sky smudged with early autumn clouds. Manhattan's rhythm, relentless and cold, paid no attention to grief or memory. For Jaden Sinclair, the calendar had stopped mattering years ago. It wasn't time he counted anymore, but absences. And on this day, like every year, absence was a noise louder than traffic. Inside the back of a black Rolls-Royce, Jaden sat in silence, one hand curled loosely over a tablet he hadn't touched in 30 minutes. The digital schedule lit up every few seconds with reminders, meetings, decisions requiring his presence. He ignored them all. His thoughts were elsewhere, trapped in the hollows of a home that no longer held warmth, caught in the echo of a laugh he hadn't heard in half a decade. 5 years ago, Lauren had died in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and unspoken apologies. Since then, Jaden had learned to keep moving, to keep building, to keep earning. Billionaire, philanthropist, widower, father. Titles stacked like corporate towers, impressive from the outside and hollow within. His daughter Claire, only 3 when Lauren passed, barely remembered her mother now. But Jaden remembered for both of them. This morning, as always, he had risen early. No press, no calls, just a single cup of black coffee and the sound of Claire quietly drawing in the sunroom. She had Lauren's quiet intensity, her ability to lose herself in small details. In that moment, Jaden had felt the weight of everything he could not give his daughter: a mother, a sense of normalcy, a world where love wasn't a memory. The car turned off the main avenue and into the narrower streets leading toward the Heartwood Foundation. Jaden had funded it since its inception, Lauren's dream, a haven for women and children with nowhere else to go. But since her passing, the mission had become diluted, smothered beneath layers of bureaucracy and board members with polished shoes and empty hands. Still, Jaden gave, if not to the people, then to the idea. His driver eased the car down a side alley, avoiding the front entrance, per Jaden's usual request. He preferred to come unseen, to observe, to remember what it was supposed to be about. That was when he saw them. A woman stood on the sidewalk just outside the rear entrance. Young, mid-20s maybe. Her hair clung wetly to her face, her arms wrapped around 2 small children, a boy and a girl. The children were silent, staring forward with wide eyes that had already seen too much. Their clothing was soaked, their shoes mismatched and muddy. Beside them sat a duffel bag that looked ready to split at the seams. Across from them stood an older couple, unmistakably upper class, dry beneath a large umbrella, dressed in expensive coats, their posture rigid and judgmental. The woman's face was pinched with disdain. The man's was colder, impassive, detached. They handed something to the younger woman, placed an envelope on the pavement, and turned away. Moments later, their car pulled away, and the sound of tires slicing through water was all that remained. The young woman didn't chase after them. She didn't cry out. Instead, she knelt to pick up the envelope, her hands trembling with the effort not to break in front of her children. The rain washed down her face, mixing with the kind of sorrow too old for her age. Jaden stepped out of the car. He didn't fully know why. He only knew that something about the scene refused to let him look away. The image of a mother holding her children in the rain while the people who once called her family drove off without a backward glance. It was too familiar. Too close to the nightmare that had followed him for years. Only this time he wasn't watching through hospital glass. He was standing in front of it. The woman looked up at him, startled. Her eyes were guarded, not from fear, but exhaustion. the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than the body. The children pressed closer to her sides, unsure of the stranger approaching. Jaden didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He simply extended a hand, an offer, not of charity, but of space, of time, of something not yet named. She hesitated. Then, with the quiet grace of someone who had learned never to expect kindness, she accepted. They stepped into the car together, mother, son, daughter. No words passed between them, just the faint sound of the rain on the windows and the presence of something beginning to shift. Claire met them at the entrance of the Sinclair estate without surprise. She said nothing, as usual, but her gaze lingered on the two children with something like recognition. Jaden watched the way her posture changed, not withdrawn, but alert, curious. The other children stayed close to their mother, clutching at her skirt as if the marble floors beneath them might open up and swallow them whole. Jaden led them through the house quietly. The woman's name, he would learn later, was Adeline. Her children, Noah and Lila, were 7 and 5. Their story, though not shared that night, unfolded in fragments. Disowned by her wealthy parents after becoming pregnant out of wedlock. Abandoned completely when she refused to give up the children. Ostracized for refusing to remarry or seek their approval. Every step she had taken since had been for her children. Every door she knocked on had shut. That night, Jaden gave them the guest wing, a room for each child, a bed for Adeline, fresh clothes, warm food, silence where no one asked for explanations. Claire watched everything from the staircase. Jaden found her later in the library, curled up with her sketchbook, her small hand smudged with graphite. He sat nearby, not speaking. She looked at him once, then returned to her drawing. She was sketching a tree, branches reaching, roots coiled tightly around a stone. He didn't ask what it meant. The house, which had echoed for years with only the sounds of clocks and distant footsteps, felt changed. It was too early to call it home. Too early to call it anything. But something had entered. Not chaos, not disruption, not even hope. Just presence. And for Jaden Sinclair, a man who had everything the world said mattered, that presence felt like the first thing he couldn't quantify. Not in dollars, not in contracts, not in grief, just in the way the air shifted when they walked in, the way silence stopped being heavy, the way Claire turned the page in her sketchbook and, for the first time in months, began to draw more than shadows. The Sinclair estate had been built with reverence and excess, columns carved from imported stone, ceilings arched like cathedrals, and hallways wide enough to swallow footsteps whole. For years, the house had stood in immaculate silence, polished and pristine, preserved like a memory Jaden couldn't let go of. It had been beautiful once. Now it was just large. The first morning after Adeline and her children arrived, nothing broke that silence, but it shifted. Jaden rose early, as always. His steps were as precise as his schedule used to be, his rituals unchanged. Coffee in the solarium, newspaper untouched. A brief glance at the garden Lauren had once designed, now tended by groundskeepers who remembered her soft instructions. The house, for all its grandeur, had become a place of echo. This morning, though, the air felt different. There was a breath to it, like something exhaled, long held back. Claire was already up. She always was. Her routines were silent, too. Wake before sunrise, watch the world change colors from the window seat in the reading room, draw until breakfast, speak only when necessary. Since Lauren's death, her voice had become a rare thing, like a note played only in private concerts. Jaden had learned not to force it, Love, in their world, had become quiet persistence. The first trace of change came not from Claire, but from the kitchen. Footsteps. 2 sets, light and uneven, padded across the marble tiles. The sound of drawers opening. A small chair dragged cautiously toward the counter. Jaden didn't interrupt. He stayed in the corridor, just out of view, listening. The rustle of plastic, the clink of silverware, and the muffled hum of children's concentration broke the estate's habitual stillness. It was Noah and Lila. They weren't making noise to disturb. They were trying to understand the boundaries. They weren't speaking. They didn't need to. They moved with the hesitance of children who had learned not to be noticed. Each act was careful, measured, done with an instinctive caution that came not from mischief, but survival. Jaden waited until their mother arrived. Adeline entered barefoot, her hair still damp from the shower. Her posture was alert, maternal, protective. She scanned the room like someone used to catching falls before they happened. Her presence softened the kitchen, not with words, but with steadiness. She didn't need to scold. The children adjusted themselves to her rhythm. Jaden watched this quietly, unnoticed. It wasn't the domesticity that struck him. It was the way the house responded, the way the light hit the counter differently, the way the smell of toast filled the room like it belonged. The Sinclair estate, once a monument to luxury, began behaving like a home. Claire observed it all from her usual perch, sketchpad on her lap, legs folded beneath her. She was used to strangers visiting. Her father's world was built on meetings, guests, dinners with people who arrived in black cars and left without leaving fingerprints. But this was different. Adeline didn't move like a guest. She didn't speak like someone looking for favor. She simply existed with dignity, as though she hadn't lost anything. And her children weren't like other children. They didn't grab or beg or invade. They hovered, they watched. They understood silence in a way Claire recognized. By midday, the estate's routines had started to bend. The housekeeper, Mariana, who'd worked for the Sinclairs for over a decade, found herself laying extra plates without being asked. The gardener, when trimming back the ivy near the conservatory, noticed small footprints pressed into the damp earth beside his path. Footprints too small to belong to staff, and too deliberate to be random. Jaden didn't offer rules. He didn't need to. The children seemed to intuit them. They explored the house in pieces, one hallway at a time, one painting at a time. Claire followed them silently, sketchbook in hand, her gaze curious but unreadable. When Lila reached out to touch a vase on a pedestal, Claire didn't flinch or stop her. She simply turned to a new page in her book and began drawing again. Adeline kept to herself. She didn't ask for favors. She didn't ask for explanations. She offered small things instead. A freshly made bed without being told, folded linens returned to the cupboard, toys arranged neatly, even in rooms they didn't use. She moved through the estate like someone grateful to be allowed through the door, but unwilling to take more than space. Jaden noticed the way she navigated the library, her fingers brushing the spines of books like old friends. He noticed how she took her tea. No sugar, heavy on lemon. He noticed the notebook she carried, its pages filled not with diary entries but sketches, blueprints, angles, designs, architectural outlines half erased, corners frayed from too much handling. They weren't just doodles. They were dreams that had been paused. That night, Jaden sat alone in the study after the children were asleep. He listened again, not just for sound, but for the absence of what used to haunt these halls. The grief was still there, but quieter, like a storm that had moved out to sea. Claire passed by once, holding her sketch pad to her chest, and paused at the door. She looked in, not at him, but toward the far end of the room where the fireplace hadn't been lit in months. Then she moved on. Upstairs, in the guest wing, Adeline stood at the window watching her children sleep. Noah clutched a pillow shaped like a whale. Lila had kicked off her blankets and curled like a comma beneath the sheet. Adeline didn't weep. She didn't smile. She simply placed a hand against the cold window pane and stayed still. In another part of the house, Claire added a new page to her sketchbook. It showed two figures in a vast hallway, standing side by side but not touching. One had her head bowed. The other looked forward. Above them, faint stars were drawn, not realistic but hopeful. At the bottom of the page, she wrote a single word in pencil: listening. And, perhaps, without quite realizing it, the house was. By the second week, the walls of the Sinclair estate had begun to forget their old silence. The transformation was subtle, almost reluctant. The kind of change that didn't happen with grand declarations, but with quiet rituals. The scraping of toast, the soft thud of bare feet on marble, the rustle of sketch paper, the laugh of a child, not yet loud, but unguarded. Jaden began noticing things he hadn't paid attention to in years. Lila had a habit of humming when concentrating, tuneless, soft, but constant. Noah carried a small red dinosaur in his pocket everywhere, rubbing its plastic edge between his fingers like a secret totem. Claire started leaving her sketchbook open rather than tucked away, as though willing to be seen without asking for it. Adeline, despite her quiet presence, left traces in every room she entered. A throw pillow straightened here, a window opened just enough to let air in, a folded sweater left with precise care. The house did not resist them. It adapted. One afternoon, Jaden returned early from a meeting that ended faster than expected. He bypassed the foyer and entered through the garden path, hoping for a moment of peace in the greenhouse Lauren had designed. But instead of solitude, he found Adeline kneeling on the stone floor adjusting a set of potted ferns with focused grace. She hadn't seen him. She was humming something low and slow, a melody built from memory. Behind her on the bench sat a set of folded papers, architectural sketches, detailed, clean, precise. He recognized what they were instantly. They weren't idle doodles. They were structural concepts, designs. Her hand was steady, her eye disciplined. She had been an architect once. He said nothing. He left as quietly as he had entered. That evening, after the children were asleep and Claire had retreated to her usual window seat with a book, Jaden sat alone in his study reviewing blueprints for a long-delayed community project Lauren had envisioned, a children's center in Harlem. The plans had been stalled for over a year. Too many voices, too many drafts, and no one who truly understood what it was supposed to be. He remembered the sketches on the greenhouse bench. The next morning, he left the center's plans on the kitchen table, open to a blank section. Nothing was said. No request, no instructions, just paper waiting. Adeline didn't touch them immediately, but 2 days later new lines began to appear. At first, Jaden assumed Claire had added them, childlike curves or imaginative notations, but they were too exact, too measured. Over the week that followed, the drawings evolved. New elevations, natural lighting adjustments, modular layouts designed for movement, accessibility, inclusion. Every line held the kind of care that comes not just from training, but from personal stake. Adeline never asked if she was allowed. She simply worked. Jaden watched this unfold with measured distance. He had spent years mastering detachment, necessary armor for a man the world expected to lead. But Adeline's precision stirred something in him. It wasn't just admiration. It was recognition of someone who still carried purpose even after the world had stripped her name from the door. One morning, Claire approached the table quietly and pointed at a feature Adeline had drawn, an indoor reading cove shaped like a tree. Without asking, she copied it into her sketchbook, adding animals peeking from behind its trunk. That night, she taped the drawing to her bedroom door. Below it, in her small, deliberate handwriting, she wrote one word: soon. It was the first time Jaden had seen his daughter make plans for the future. As the designs grew, so did something else. The bond between Claire and the other children deepened, not loud, not chaotic, but woven from shared silence. They didn't need explanations. Children like them had their own language. They built it from glances, gestures, and unspoken invitations. On stormy days, they created forts from sofa cushions and wool blankets. On sunny ones, they chased shadows across the courtyard, inventing rules as they went. Claire never led, but she followed. She never demanded, but she listened. And, in their company, she started to smile without being prompted. Jaden noticed the light in her eyes returning, slowly like dawn. Adeline noticed too, though she said nothing. She began to occupy the house with a kind of reverent familiarity, not claiming it, but living within it. She baked more, walked barefoot on the garden paths, read quietly in the parlor when the children napped. Her presence, once careful, grew confident, not presumptuous but unafraid, as if the fear of being asked to leave had begun to ease. Jaden felt the shift in himself as well. His work schedule, once relentless, began to accommodate more mornings at home. He didn't plan it that way. He simply stopped scheduling calls before 10 a.m. He made coffee instead of having it made. He walked Claire to the garden before breakfast and waited silently as she picked herbs for the tea Adeline had introduced. The rhythm was not normal. It was not what people like them were supposed to do, but it was good. It was real. Of course, nothing remained untouched by the outside world forever. News of the Harlem Project began circulating again, anonymously at first, then with quiet attribution. Investors took interest. Journalists sent inquiries. Whispers began to spread about the mysterious architect behind the redesign. A few well-connected members of Jaden's circle recognized Adeline from years past. From a debutante ball, a gala, a family Christmas party in Connecticut. Whispers turned to questions. Questions turned to pressure. One evening, a letter arrived. It was unsigned but unmistakable in tone. A warning, a reminder, a threat, veiled in etiquette. Adeline's parents knew she was at the Sinclair estate. They wanted her to leave. Jaden read the letter alone in his study and placed it back into its envelope. He didn't tell her. Not yet. Not until he understood what he wanted to do. That night, he stood at the window of the guest wing, watching as she tucked her children into bed. Claire sat nearby, drawing on the floor, content. Lila asked for another story. Noah had already fallen asleep, one arm draped across his sister's legs. Adeline leaned back in the rocking chair, her silhouette lit by the bedside lamp. She wasn't smiling, but there was peace in the curve of her shoulders. Jaden watched her for a long time. Not as a guest, not as a problem, but as something else entirely. The house, once a mausoleum of memory, had become a place where breath had returned, where drawings hung on walls without frames, where tea steeped beside half-folded blueprints, where children laughed, tentatively, honestly, where a woman who had been thrown away by the world had quietly rebuilt a place for herself and made it stronger than before. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a beginning. And Jaden knew, whatever the cost, whatever the noise outside might become, he would protect it. Not because she needed saving, but because she had already saved something in him. The message did not arrive with ceremony. It came folded, unsigned, sealed in the kind of envelope used for legal summons. Jaden found it tucked beneath his morning paper, its weight heavier than the ink it carried. The words were concise, formal, but laced with venom. Adeline's presence at the Sinclair estate, it implied, was inappropriate, harmful to his reputation, damaging to his business interests. The names were not signed, but their identity was obvious. Her parents had found her. Jaden read the letter twice, then again, slower. His pulse didn't quicken, but his thoughts shifted. For weeks now, the house had breathed differently, moved differently, lived differently, and now the outside world had remembered what it meant to claim ownership, of names, of narratives, of control. Adeline, for all her grace and silence, had never spoken of the final fracture. Jaden knew only fragments, moments caught in the delicate pauses between her sentences, in the way she folded laundry, in the way she reached for her children like she might lose them again. But now the threat was no longer implied. It was declared. He said nothing that morning. He went through his routines. He watched Claire read to Lila, who asked questions faster than answers could be formed. He noticed Noah reorganizing the spice jars in alphabetical order, whispering the names under his breath. He caught Adeline in the conservatory, hands deep in a potted basil plant, lost in the small labor of tending to something that could grow. But his silence was not stillness. It was strategy. Later that day, a call came from his legal team, then another from his publicist. A few soft headlines had already begun forming in society columns, vague references to Sinclair's new live-in architect, theories about his motives, implications about morality. Some used softer tones. Others didn't. By mid-afternoon, a tabloid had printed an image of the estate's gate with a blurred figure resembling Adeline standing just beyond it. It was enough. That evening, Jaden called a meeting with the board of the Heartwood Foundation. He hadn't attended one in over a year. When he walked into the room, people stood, not out of respect, out of caution. Jaden Sinclair didn't attend unless something was changing. He brought the children's center plans with him. He presented them, Adeline's drawings, her designs, her vision. He said little. He didn't need to. The diagrams spoke for themselves, the scale, the precision, the humanity within the blueprint. A room for children with sensory sensitivity, quiet nooks shaped for neurodivergent play, wide halls designed not to impress but to include. When he finished, he informed them that Adeline would be listed as lead architect and project director. Full credit, full authority. The board objected. He didn't argue. He simply reminded them that 92% of the foundation's annual funding came from his estate. The objections ceased. That night, the official press release was issued. Sinclair Holdings would break ground on the new Children's Center in the fall. Lead architect, Adeline Hartwell. Single mother, advocate, survivor. No one in the house spoke of it immediately. Not Adeline, not Jaden, not even Claire, though she lingered longer than usual outside the study door, but the shift was felt. The house felt warmer that night, but tense. A kind of hush that comes before storms. The storm came 2 days later. A petition was filed, formal and strategic. Adeline's parents were seeking custody of Noah and Lila. Their claim was based on instability, concern for moral upbringing, and the children's exposure to an unstructured domestic environment. The irony, cruel and exact, was not lost on anyone. Adeline received the notice in the morning. She read it alone. Jaden found her in the library afterward, staring at the fireplace as though it might burn answers out of stone. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She simply placed the letter on the table and walked out. Jaden made his choice. He called his lawyers. Not the public-facing ones, the real ones. The ones who handled private wars behind courtrooms and closed doors. He informed them of the suit. He gave them full access. He made a statement to the press the next day. Adeline Hartwell was not a liability. She was a leader. He described her not as someone rescued, but as someone who rebuilt a future in a space that was never meant to welcome her. He used words like visionary, partner, family. Then he went further. He made it public that he would personally fund a legal team for any parent facing wrongful custody threats due to family estrangement or economic control. The gesture wasn't just defense, it was a declaration. The court hearing was scheduled within the week. Jaden stood beside Adeline at the courthouse steps, flanked not by security, but by quiet allies. Volunteers from Heartwood, parents who had once received care under Lauren's designs, students who had studied under Adeline when she briefly taught night classes before being forced to quit. No one cheered. No one shouted. But they were there. Inside the courtroom, the opposition wore tailored suits and the armor of reputation. They brought witnesses, spoke of bloodlines, reputations, expectations. They questioned Adeline's choices, her independence, her refusal to cooperate. They painted her as unstable, prideful, irresponsible, but they hadn't counted on Claire. She asked to speak. No one had prompted her. She rose from her seat, notebook in hand, and walked to the front. She placed a single drawing on the judge's desk. 3 children beneath a roof, stars drawn above them, and 2 adults standing nearby. Not in front of the children, not behind them, but beside them. She said nothing, but it was enough. The judge ruled that Adeline's children were safe, that no law had been broken, that moral concerns were not the court's concern, that love was not only present, it was flourishing. The custody petition was denied. Outside, the cameras flashed, but Jaden didn't speak. Adeline didn't pose. Claire simply held Noah's hand while Lila sang under her breath, unaware of the history they had just walked through. That night, the house was quiet again, but not empty. Jaden stood in the hallway watching Adeline tuck the children into bed. Her hands moved with tired grace, her eyes softer but not naive. When she turned and saw him, nothing was said, but something settled. Not peace, not victory, belonging. In the dining room, Claire sat alone with her sketchbook drawn again. This time she drew a porch, 5 chairs, light in the windows, a dog that didn't exist sleeping beside the steps. Above the porch, in her careful handwriting, she wrote a single word: home. Autumn arrived not with fanfare, but with gentleness. The air cooled first in the early hours before sunrise. Then came the leaves, subtle changes in the garden, where green gave way to gold, then to amber, then to a fiery shade of red that seemed to linger longer near the Sinclair estate than anywhere else. The house had changed, though no one said it aloud. Jaden noticed it in small ways, how the morning light hit the kitchen window and someone was always already there, pouring tea, slicing fruit, drawing quietly. He noticed it in Claire's laughter, which no longer arrived as a surprise, but as part of the daily rhythm. He noticed it in the shoes near the door, 5 pairs now, not arranged neatly, but always close together. Adeline had begun setting down roots. It started subtly. She rearranged the pantry. Not out of control, but intuition. She planted rosemary along the garden wall, claiming a patch of earth with her hands, not her words. She folded Jaden's laundry one morning and didn't apologize for it. She stopped waiting for permission to belong. The children, too, had grown louder, not in volume but in presence. Noah developed a fascination with the attic and began cataloging the things he found there. Lila made friends at school, even though she rarely brought them home, as if this house was still a sacred place not yet to be shared. Claire returned from school with a glitter on her sleeves and questions in her eyes. She began writing again. Not just drawing, writing, sentences, pages, letters she never sent. One of those letters, folded into a tiny square, ended up beneath Jaden's coffee mug one morning. It read simply, "She makes it feel like Mom is still here, but also different, but also okay." The adoption process began quietly. Jaden didn't announce it. He didn't ask. The idea emerged like everything else in this home, natural, unforced. The paperwork was filed, the background checks passed, the interviews conducted. No headlines, no fanfare, just documents and declarations. Then, one day, it was done. The judge signed the order with a smile. The clerk gave the children a basket of candy from behind her desk. No cameras, no press, just 3 children who now belonged in name to the man who had once walked past them in the rain and couldn't look away. That night, they held a celebration. It wasn't a party in the traditional sense. There were no guests, no speeches, just warmth. Jaden lit a fire in the hearth. Adeline cooked dinner with Claire and Lila standing on chairs beside her, flour dusting their sleeves. Noah built a centerpiece from pine cones and ribbon, declaring it a family crown. Claire made name tags for everyone and misspelled everyone on purpose. After dinner, Jaden brought down an old suitcase. Inside were things he hadn't opened in years. Letters Lauren had written and never sent, baby clothes Claire had outgrown, photos that still smelled of old ink. He laid the items out on the table and let everyone touch what they wanted. No one asked questions. Grief had become part of the furniture, acknowledged but not feared. Then Jaden brought out 5 blank cards and a pen. They each chose a name. Claire kept hers, but drew a heart around it. Lila wrote Lila Sinclair in enormous crooked letters, then covered the whole card in stickers. Noah took the longest. When he finished, he'd written Noah Brave Sinclair, then scratched out Brave and wrote Inventor above it. Adeline stared at her card for a long time. She didn't write her name. She drew a window, a sun, and 3 stars. Then she wrote one word beneath them, Mom. She handed the card to Claire. Claire didn't flinch. She placed it in the center of the table. That night, Jaden stood on the porch long after the house had gone quiet. The stars were out. The air was crisp. Somewhere upstairs, 3 children slept in 3 rooms that no longer felt temporary. And downstairs, behind the kitchen door, Adeline was wiping down counters, humming the same tune she had the day he met her. He turned and watched her for a moment, the light behind her casting her shadow toward the garden. She was tired, worn, human, and perfect in the way people become when they stop asking for permission to exist. The next morning, Claire found a small cedar box on the mantel. It was carved delicately, rounded at the edges. On top was a single word, Grace. Inside were 5 rings, not of gold, not of silver, but of polished wood, each one unique. One for each of them. Not legal, not official, but real. Jaden gave them out at breakfast. No speeches, just a quiet moment, a quiet offering. Each child slid theirs on a finger, No ceremony, no fuss. Adeline's he didn't hand to her. He left it on her windowsill. She found it hours later and wore it on a chain around her neck. Weeks passed. The children's center broke ground with Claire cutting the ribbon. Adeline oversaw construction herself. Her name was now on the blueprints, on the signage, on the minds of those who'd once forgotten her. And now they remembered. Jaden reduced his work hours. He attended every school recital, every meeting, every breakfast where Lila insisted the eggs were cooked wrong, but I liked them anyway. Claire began writing stories about families who lived in tree houses. Noah published his first poem in the school newsletter, titled The Day I Got Two Dads. He meant Jaden and the neighbor's old dog, but the title stayed. And one morning, long after the first frost, Claire brought home a letter from school. It was an assignment. Describe your family. She wrote, "We are 5. We are noise and drawn and pancakes and love. We are not a normal family. We are a built one. Like a house with rooms added on and windows that didn't match at first, but now they shine." That night, Jaden framed it and hung it in the hallway. No one ever asked again how they became a family. It was written in the walls now. It was drawn in chalk on the porch. It was spoken in bedtime whispers and morning yawns. It was carried in pockets, worn on fingers, stitched into notes. It was real. And it was theirs. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And if you believe in stories that heal, connect, and remind us what truly matters, don't forget to subscribe. There's more warmth waiting for you here.